In this AA Illustrates, we're going to take a look at doing bot migrations in Automation 360. So if you're coming from version 10 or version 11 of Automation Anywhere Enterprise, this is the video for you because you've gone through a process of migrating your control room and now you're to the point where you're ready to migrate your bots. That's exactly what we're going to cover in this video. So jumping straight in, I want to talk about kind of where we are and the general flow of performing a migration. So there's really three total phases. Number one is checking your migration readiness, and we have content on this already. It means checking your control room compatibility if you're coming from version 10 or version 11, knowing exactly what subversion of, I'm on 11.3.4, knowing the subversion, checking the compatibility for that with Automation 360. It also means running and analyzing your bot scanner results. So you can download and run the bot scanner utility. You would basically run it against all of your ATMX files, not directly in the control room, but off a local copy. And it will analyze all of those and tell you if you're going to run into any specific problems with the commands that you've used or the implementations of your different automations. And it will give you some suggestions just to kind of be ready for once you do your migration. But assuming you have like a 90+ score on your bot scanner results, then you're generally safe to move forward to the next phase. And that next phase is actually preparing your new control room. And that means migrating your control room data and your bots to your new Automation 360 control room. We have two videos covering this. One is showing the migration from a version 11 control room to an Automation 360 on-prem control room. I'll have a link for that below if you want to check that out. We have another video that's also showing a similar migration, except going from Automation Anywhere Enterprise version 11 to Automation 360 Cloud, and it uses the cloud migration utility. So again, I'll put a link to that video as well. If you have followed either one of those paths, you're ready to be with me here for phase 3, which is where we're migrating and validating bots. So whether you went the on-prem route or the cloud route or the self-hosted cloud route, the idea with phase 3 is that you've got all of your ATMX files into your new control room. And at this point, you're doing the migration process of ATMX files into Automation 360 compatible bots. And I say ATMX files, but that's inclusive of ATMX files as well as Metabot files. So the objective here is that we want to perform that migration, and then we want to review and validate those bot migrations. And I want to show you a couple of tips on things you want to look out for as we're doing those migrations, things we want to look at as we're testing, and some general comparisons to what we would have done in version 11 versus what we have in Automation 360. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'll give one quick preface here. This is probably going to be a long video, right? There's a lot that we want to show here. There's a lot of tips I want to cover. There's a lot of demonstrations we want to do. I'm going to show how to migrate probably 3 or 4 bots. So I'm going to add chapter titles to the YouTube video, and we'll have some of that in our dev portal article as well. So if there's a specific topic you want to jump into, feel free to skip ahead. You can hang with me the whole time and we'll go through it together. Or if you want to jump forward, that's totally fine. Hey, quick reminder, by the way, if you're not yet subscribed to the Automation Anywhere YouTube channel, please subscribe, give this video a like. We put this content together to empower our developer community and our user community. So we want to make sure it's helpful for you. Leave a comment, let us know how this helped. Let us know if there's a gap that we can still fill in. All right, let's jump right in. So the Automation 360 bot migration flow is kind of a two-part thing. Part 1 is more of a one-time event, which means setting up your migration admin account and setting up your migration runner account. And I'm going to talk about both of those. But those two accounts enable me to essentially go through this migration wizard and migrate as many bots as I want to all at once. Now, I probably don't want to migrate everything all at once. I would prefer to do this as kind of a iterative, repetitive event. So I want to migrate a subset of my bots, go through the validation process of like reviewing them, testing the output, making sure everything's working, and then eventually making that bot available in production, which would mean scheduling, prod availability, whatever that looks like for your bot, whether it's triggered through an API, whether it's run through an RE process, or whether it's run off schedule, however that looks like, eventually making that available in production. So there are two roles that we just talked about, the migration admin and then also the migration runner. And When you've done your migration, what you should see is that all of your user accounts that you had in version 11 or version 10 have hopefully migrated over to Automation 360. So in our last video that we did, which was the version 11 Enterprise to Automation 360 Cloud video, all of my accounts that I had set up and I showed in that video will show up here in my control room when we take a look in just a minute. Now, there are specific permissions that are required for your migration admin user. These are the specific permissions. This comes directly from the documentation. I will reference that below if you want to check that out. The easiest way to do this though is to use the built-in role, which is AAE_bot migration admin. It has all of the permissions you're going to need for the migration admin account. Now, the other account that you'll need is the migration runner account. And the runner is essentially the bot runner that's actually performing these migrations itself. So again, it has to have a set number of permissions. Most of those are included directly in the bot migration admin. Some of them are technically outside of the permissions itself, right? Like this has to have an unattended bot runner license. So I'll need that. It has to have auto login status set. Again, that's outside of the role itself. But the easiest way to do this is to add this role to your migration runner user, which again should just be like a bot runner account, one of the bot runner accounts you migrated, or create a new one if you want to just temporarily, and give it this account access as well as AAE basic. Okay, so default device settings is another one we'll check. If you don't have some of these things set correctly, when you start to run your migration wizard, you will get an error and it's going to say, hey, your migration is not ready. We checked for these feature permissions and this is missing, right? And so I did this earlier just to show for a screenshot, right? I've got my migration admin account and then I've got my bot runner account. My bot runner was clearly missing some permissions, so I had to go back and address that. My migration admin was also missing some permissions, so I had to go and address that. Okay, so if you get a message similar like this, don't freak out. You can just use that same account that we just talked about, or the same role we just talked about, the AAE bot migration admin. That should address all of this. If there's something like the default device isn't set or something like that, you will have to go and address that. The easiest way to deal with this is just to take a screenshot like I did here and then go check those specific permissions that are missing as you set up that account. Now, before we actually jump into me showing some migrations and doing this in my own control room, I do want to go over some very general bot migration tips. And maybe this will help you along your way so that as you're starting to migrate your own bots, you can hopefully reflect on some of these and accelerate your migration process. Number one, check your global values. In version 11 and version 10, we would oftentimes use system variables, right? We had the AA base path, AA application path. We use these quite a bit because when we would, let's say, store error logs, we would typically write that to the application path directory and then like save it in a folder based off the name of the bot and then like /error or something like that. In Automation 360, we don't have those same folder paths being used, right? So it used to be that version 10 and version 11 were very dependent on the My Documents directory of the specific user that was running the bot. That doesn't exist anymore. And so when you want to do things like your logging, when you want to do things like log management or storing out a screenshot of an error, I would suggest logging those to a more central location that's not specific to a user account's profile. So for me, I put all of my logs in the program data directory, and that's just like what I like to use because it helps me to always know where to go to find my logs. And you want to set that as a standard for your bots, regardless of like, oh, well, this bot was written by me, and this bot was written by Sarah, and this bot was written by Ankur, right? Like I want to make sure that I've addressed that across all of my bots. So they're all doing their logging, they're all doing their, whatever it is, error handling the same way. Those things should be standardized. So check that if you're dependent on things like emails within your bot, and definitely review it for where you're setting up your AA base path and application path. You may choose to just modify your code and not reference these variables at all. That's fine too. When you have a Metabot that gets migrated over to Automation 360, what happens is you will have basically one task bot per function in your Metabot. So in version 10 and version 11, you could create Metabots. Those Metabots could be based on a DLL. They also could be based off of just using commands and having this like repeatable, reusable code element that you could use and call almost like a function. Regardless if it was DLL based or command based, when that gets converted to Automation 360, you're going to end up with individual task bots, one per function as defined by the Metabot. And so just be aware of that. I actually don't think that's a bad concept. It kind of decompartmentalizes the code a little bit. You could still have a folder that had all of those functions inside it, and you could still call it the same way you would have before. But just be aware that that's what's going to happen. And we have a video coming up that shows taking a DLL-based Metabot in version 11 that's working and then migrating that over to Automation 360 and what you end up with and how you can work with that. So that will be coming out shortly as well. Big one here, which is like a sticking point for me. Don't keep doing something because that's the way we've always done it, right? And that can mean the way you organize your bots, the way that you use your roles. Maybe you haven't been really great about creating roles that are the least permissive and you've just been like kind of giving out all kinds of permissions because like, okay, that didn't work, so let me try something else, and I just added more, and okay, now it finally works, but I don't go back and revisit if those other permissions were actually needed or not. So use this as an opportunity to clean some things up. The organization of your bots is really important. I can tell you that from experience, when as a customer of Automation Anywhere, we started using Automation Anywhere, we ended up with a gigantic mess in our, at the time it was the My Tasks directory. Now in Automation 360, it's the bots directory. But we ended up with a gigantic mess there because we didn't come up with a systematic approach for the way that my team is gonna like store all of our bots versus the way that HR is gonna do it versus finance. So if you haven't done that yet, come up with a systematic way that you're able to store and expand on when you create and store bots in Automation 360. You're only going to do this migration once, so use it as an opportunity to fix some things along the way. That also goes for how and where you're doing logging. If you aren't using a bot template or a bot shell, I would very much encourage that. You want to have standardization across your bots, regardless of if they're finance or HR or operations or whatever. I want to have standards for the way that we're doing error handling, the way that we're doing logging, the way that we're capturing and reporting on our KPIs. Those things should be the same across all of my bots so that when someone's going to support a bot, they know exactly where to go to look for the logs. Or if we're doing reporting for the bot, we know exactly how it's doing its reporting. We know exactly where it's storing that data. So use this as an opportunity to clean some of those things up if you haven't been good about those standards so far. One more page of tips here. Automation 360 does things in a new way, and it's okay to rewrite some of the sections of your code so you can better understand them after this migration. So specifically, I think of the way that like looping was done in version 11 and version 10. Looping through Excel, let's be honest, was not the most like elegant process in the world. You had to use some Excel system variables, and it was like based on a column number and then also a row number, and it got a little bit confusing at times, let's be honest. So looping in Automation 360 is significantly easier than it was in version 10 and version 11. And that's extended beyond just Excel. That means if you're looping through a list, if you're looping through some of the new data types that are supported by Automation 360, if you're looping through an HTML table, you have this concept now of a record. It makes things way easier to be able to loop through iterative content and be able to make use of it. Database commands have also changed. Again, it's a change for the better. It's a lot easier to use in Automation 360. And the same goes with error handling. The error handling approach now, I much prefer over what was done in version 10 and version 11. If you're not familiar with it yet, you should check it out. It's a try, catch, and finally block. And that enables you to write your code in a way so that, hey, if this fails, it's going to jump over to that catch. My catch is going to execute, and then I can optionally have a finally. So maybe I have one gigantic try catch that surrounds all of the code in my bot. I can still use child try catches inside of that if I need to, but I have one gigantic try catch. If that catch gets called and I have a failure, in my finally, that code is going to execute either way, right? And that might be where I do things like log the status of the bot, right, whether it was successful or not. That might be where I close all applications, or at least attempt to close all applications, because what I don't want is my bot to leave a mess on the bot runner so that when the next bot executes, there's already a bunch of windows that are open that might cause confusion. So in the finally block would be an appropriate place to run code like, hey, I'm going to make sure to clean everything up, make sure that I leave this desktop, any files that I've saved locally that don't need to be saved long term, I've cleaned all that stuff up so that it's good to go for the next task gets run on this bot runner. The last tip I want to cover is the variables have scope in Automation 360. And so this is a concept that's a little bit different than the way things were done in version 10 and version 11. In version 10, if I mapped a variable to a subtask, right, and that subtask made a change to that variable, it would automatically be reflected in my parent task. And that was very similar to what you would call like a global scope in other programming languages, in that if that variable changes anywhere, it's going to change everywhere. In Automation 360, that's changed a little bit. Now, when I create a variable, it can be marked as an input, an output, a constant, or neither, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be an input or an output. And it can be marked as more than one, right? It can be an input and an output. And when I'm converting my bots from from version 11 to Automation 360 format, everything is marked as an input and an output because that's how they were in version 10 and version 11. You can leave them as is, or you can choose to limit their scope. Just make sure you're reviewing that and testing it as you go through and do so. More or less, this is just a tip for as you're starting to create new bots in Automation 360. Pay close attention to that scope. Know whether this needs to be an input, an output, or neither, right? Some of your variables may not need to actually be an input or an output, right? They're just going to be used by this bot, and that's fine. But if I'm, let's say, having a parent bot and I want to call a subtask or a child bot, I would need to possibly mark certain values as output, or specifically on the subtask, I need to mark values as input. So there's a place for me to map values from the parent bot to the child bot that could be basically taking them in, almost like when you define a function. And then I would also have a return from that child bot, which would be the output variables that I've marked. So there's more that we have on that in the documentation and on the dev portal, but just pay attention to variable scope. Now, before we get too far into our demo here, I do want to talk about the fact that there's actually two ways to migrate bots. The way that we've talked about so far is running the migration wizard, I think is what you would call it. So you would migrate all ATMX and MBot files that have already been copied to the Automation 360 control room. And I'll show you that here in a second. We'll be able to see those ATMX files. We'll be able to see those MBot files. We'll be able to convert them using this migration wizard. This does require a dedicated bot runner with those permissions, as well as a migration admin user. And we'll set both of those up here in just a second. The other method is you can actually use a bot migration package. So in version 10 and version 11 language, we had on the left-hand side of our workbench this concept of commands, right? And there was lots of commands you could use for Excel and other stuff like that. The concept of commands is now called packages in Automation 360. And there's a bunch of packages that come with the product by default. You also have the ability to use the package SDK, create your own custom packages, or you can go and download packages from the Automation Anywhere bot store. Regardless, one of the packages that does come with the product is called bot migration. And that package has a specific action in it called migrate legacy bot. And you can use this to migrate ATMX files that are stored locally, right? So it's an ATMX file that's on my machine. I can use that to convert to an Automation 360 compatible bot that will live on the Automation 360 control room. So one tip on that, it can be run inside of a loop. So if I want to create this bot that will scan this folder and find all the ATMX files and all the MBot files and convert them, I can do that. But just be aware that wherever I run this bot migration bot that I've created, wherever I run it from, that's where the migrated bots are going to end up, right? Because it doesn't know anything else about folder hierarchy and structure and things like that. So I may need to go through and do some of the mappings to associate a parent bot with a child bot, or any bot with an mbot or a metabot, which is now a subtask. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I'll show you both of those approaches in this video again, which is why I said this is going to be a longer one. All right, let's migrate some bots. So I'm going to jump over to the control room, and I'm going to first log in as the migration admin. And this is the same user that we had from our last video where we were doing a migration from version 11 on-prem to Automation 360 Cloud. A couple things I want to show you here, right? We said that if we go back to our slides, let me bring this one up real quick. We want to set up these two, the migration admin and the migration runner. So the easiest way we said to do that was to add this AAE migration admin role for each of those users. So I'm going to go to my user here. Bot runner is the one that has an unattended bot runner license, which is one of the requirements we talked about. And it has some basic roles that I had defined on version 11 that have now been copied over. I'm going to include this AAE bot migration admin. I can do this temporarily, that's fine, like just for the sake of running my migrations. Once I'm done, I can remove this role. The bot runner itself doesn't need this beyond performing these migrations. I'll hit Save Changes. Notice it also has a default device that was defined. Let me go back here real quick. This will be important. So it has a default device that's been defined. It's my local machine, so that's a little bit unique, right? Like not everyone's going to be doing this all from one machine, but since I am, this is my machine right here. If we go back to users here, I'm going to set up my bot creator as the migration admin. So I'll go right here, AAE bot migration admin, through the AAE basic and bot creator role that I had from version 11. All the other requirements for this particular user are met as far as what we looked at right here. So all of this is addressed through my bot migration admin and through those other roles. So I'm good to go. I don't need to be on my admin account anymore for right now. So what I'm going to do is log into my, let's log into my runner first. So I'm going to log out here and log into my bot runner. Now from the bot runner, the main thing I want to verify is just make sure that it has a default device. And if I go here and click on the account and then my settings, if I look at devices, I can see that the bot running device has been defined, and that means it has a default device that's been defined. I want to make sure that this is the only user with that device defined as their default machine. Otherwise I'll run into some issues. So I'm good here. I'm going to log out of this runner account. I'm going to log back in as, no, we didn't do this yet, but log in as my bot creator. Okay, so again, if you're curious about where all these accounts came from, these were migrated over from my version 11 environment. You can use any one of your accounts for this. Just make sure you have one that is a runner that can be an unattended bot runner license that can be dedicated to doing this. The reason I'm making my bot creator the admin is because I'm going to use it to run that migration, but then I'm also going to use this same account to actually execute the bots after they've been migrated so that we can test and fix some things and refine some things and rerun it. So that's why I'm doing that from the bot creator account. Now, to actually initiate the migration process, I'm going to click on this migration section here at the very bottom. And you can see that I've done some a couple days ago just for testing some different approaches here. One other thing I want to show you real quick is if I go to manage and global values, I've got a bunch of global values that show up here, like my application path, AA base path, which is actually blank, and then email settings, which may have been used from my previous Automation Anywhere version 11 environment. So if I wanted to set those and I wanted my bots just to work like as close to as was as possible, I would come and take a look and set some of these values. Specifically, I know that my bots reference this application path. Now, what's problematic is that the machine that I'm using now doesn't have that directory. So if I go to see users, I don't have a C users administrator documents automation anywhere files. That doesn't exist on this machine. It did on my old environment. It doesn't now. So I want to change this value so that when my bots actually run, they will run on a path that actually ends up being valid. So what I'm going to do here, I have access here. So I'm going to change this just to say admin. And we'll hit save changes. And that way, when I run my bots, I know that they'll be using that updated path. We'll change this again in a little bit to reflect a different path. But for right now, I just want to show you that one. All right, so in the top right corner here, I click on the Migrate Bots button. And this will enable me to give my migration a name just so I can identify it later. Let's say A illustrates migration 1. Overwrite if a bot with the same name exists. You can choose how you want to do the Excel legacy behavior. Here they have a tip that says if you're migrating from 11.3.0 and below, we recommend selecting this. I'm actually migrating from 11.3.4, so I'm going to leave this one unchecked. Same thing with my email and converting my bots that are using Internet Explorer to Edge with Internet Explorer mode. Obviously, IE is being decommissioned finally, and if you want to automatically have those bots migrated to using Edge with Internet Explorer mode turned on, you could do that right here. Now, for my bots, what we talked about is that we don't necessarily want to migrate all of the bots at once, right? I could sit here and just say like, yep, everything in my task, go ahead and go for it. But I would end up with all of my bots migrated, and then I'd have like no way to remember where I was with checking and testing and things like that. So the way that I would suggest to do it is to take it process by process. So I'm going to go to bot games. This is one of the bots that we were kind of testing and playing with on the V11 environment. It is a single bot that shows up here. It's an ATMX file. I could select the folder itself, or I could select the ATMX file itself. Either way, excuse me, it's going to recognize that. It will also recognize any dependencies. So this bot didn't have any subtasks or anything like that. It's just a standalone bot. If you wanted to go slightly larger in scope, you could do that and do a couple at a time, but I'm just doing one for right now. When I go to my bot runner, I'm going to select what bot runner I want to run this on. Obviously, we said that this user has a default machine that's been defined, which is my local machine, and I'll hit Migrate Bots. So if you saw that pop up real quick there, you saw that it was checking for the prerequisites just to make sure that like all the permissions that are required from the migration admin side and from the migration runner side have been met. Here it has sent that task to my bot runner, and it's performing the migration right now. So it's going to do that migration. We can check on the status of that. Let's refresh right here. Let's see if it shows up. It's not showing up yet because it's not done. If I go here to activity, I can see it showing up in, there was the migration, or what do we call it? A illustrates migration 1. Now I can go back to the migration. If I refresh here, here is my AA illustrates migration 1. Now, notice here that I got a success, but it says successful with action required. So if I click on the migration run itself, we can dig in to see exactly why it's saying that message. If I go to my results right here, let's see, my reason, that's goofy, let's try this one. There we go. My reason says the bot has some actions which need to be addressed. So I'm going to go and find this bot. Actually, I think it's right here. If I click, there we go. And if I click up in the right-hand corner here, this is my assistant, and it will show me exactly where it found an issue. And in this case, it found an issue saying, hey, you're referencing this subtask that's actually not available right now, right? A child Metabot is required for the parent bot to run. Now, this is actually not required for this bot. It's commented out. So my bot should still run, but we can still address this just to make sure we've taken care of any issue. If I go now and look at my public directory on the automation tab, I can see then the customer onboarding folder. I have my ATMX file, which was what we just used for the migration. And then I have my master bot, and my master bot exists right here. again, because it's in the public directory, I can't make any changes to it. And this is, again, like kind of a concept that is different with version 11 versus Automation 360. In version 11, I would have my local repository that would really exist on my local file system. When I was ready to publish something to the control room, I would go and publish that, and it would push it to the control room. What this is saying is you have a private directory, which is where you can create your bots, modify your bots, test them, but then when they're ready for production or when they're ready for more public consumption, you would check them in and publish them to the public repository. So if I needed to make changes to this bot, I would need to click this Checkout Taskbot button, and I could choose to check out the taskbot and all of its dependencies. I'm not going to do that right now, but let's go ahead and test it and let's see what happens. So I'm going to select to run taskbot. Notice it has a ton of variables here that are looking for inputs. And just like we talked about in the slides, everything in this bot is marked as both an input and an output variable. So if I needed to fill in an input here for any of these values, I could. I don't need to because that's not how my bot was created. But if I needed to fill that in, I have the ability to do that. And that's why all of these are showing up here, because every bot that gets migrated has all of its variables marked as both input and output. If I go to run as, I'm going to select my bot runner. I'll move that guy over. That's the same machine that we just did for our migration, so that's fine. And then I can give my bot run a name. Let's just call it AA illustrates customer onboarding run 1. You know, a name that just kind of rolls off the tongue. And let's hit run bot now. So this is going to do the same thing that we kind of saw for that migration. It's going to send that task to my local machine, which is my bot runner. It's not the machine that's been defined for my bot creator. It will send that to my local machine. It's connecting to my device right now. And then I should see that task run. Okay, so my bot failed. And if we go to look at the historical runs here, we can see exactly what happened. And it said there was a problem at line 83. Unable to create the folder Automation Anywhere, My Task, Bot Games, Customer Onboarding / error folder. It already exists. Use a different name and folder and try again. So that could be an issue, right? Based on how I've done my migration of my old commands from my Automation 360 or from my version 11 bot to my Automation 360 bot. So we're going to have to actually check this one out. So what we'll do here is I'm going to select this master bot. I'm going to select to check out the task bot. In the advanced options, I can choose to check it out with all of its dependencies. If I just say yes, check it out, it's only going to check it out with a copy of dependencies, not the actual code for those dependencies. Again, for this bot, it doesn't matter, but for other bots, it might. Now, it told me that the error was on line 83. 83 looks like it's my finally block, which is basically determining what happens if an error occurs. So what I really need to go to and find is where I'm creating that folder, which is my error folder. And if we go look here, I'm checking to see if the folder exists. Now, the variables that have been done for this migration are a little bit weird, right? It's getting the absolute path for my AA base path, and then it's going to try to create that error folder for me. Now, if I want to leave this as it is for the most part, what I can do is just check this box that says overwrite an existing folder, right? That means, hey, if that folder is already there, go ahead and delete it. This seems like it probably should have checked and found that, but it did not. So it's referencing a application path, Automation Anywhere, My Task, Bot Games, Bot Name, and then folder. If we go back to look at our global values here, I'm going to open this in a new tab. We want to see how these guys are set. And just check this one more time. We're using, what is it, a application path. So let's go right here. Application path is set to C admin users, Automation Anywhere. Let's go here. Automation Anywhere, My Tasks, Bot Games, Customer Onboarding. I'm going to delete the supply chain management because that's an old one. But I already have that folder. It already exists. There's nothing in it right now. So what I'm going to do is this change that we just did. Oops, where was that? to overwrite the existing folder if it already exists should be enough. I'll go back here. I'll do the same thing for the logging folder and for the snapshots folder. Now I want to take a look at my bot just to see if there's anything else that kind of jumps out. One thing that jumps out to me here is this C program files x86 versus C program files Google Chrome, right? When you're moving to a new environment like we are, right? We move from version 11 to Automation 360. You may be using new bot runners, and those bot runners may not be configured exactly like your old machines. So this is a good thing to have in your code, right? It's checking to see like, okay, is Google in the program x86 folder, or is it in program files and it's a 64-bit version of Google Chrome, right? That's a good thing to have because it's checking to make sure that it's finding the right application to open regardless. I'm also going to get rid of this line that's commented out here. There was 2 of these. They were holdover lines from my old code, just so that we would have an error that showed up here with our assistant. If I hit save, see if the assistant says anything else. It says line 31, mark is reviewed, and we're good, right? We already fixed that. This is the new line 31, which is just a comment. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the local device now as the bot running device, so that when I do my testing, I can hit run and it's going to deploy locally. This window is different because this didn't exist in version 11, but it's the same thing we just talked about. It's looking for all of the input variables. Again, because every variable is set as input and output, that's why it shows up. I'm going to leave that totally blank and just hit confirm. So I want this to now be kicked off locally. I'm running this in kind of my development mode. It's not being run directly by a bot runner. It's being run by my development account. And it should essentially complete what was the lab for our bot games season 1 from August of 2021. So it's going through and doing that. I can see that this bot is working. We'll let it finish up here. But I would say that this is now a successfully migrated bot. I could dig into the code a little bit more if I wanted to possibly make some changes, see if there was some way that I could improve the efficiency of the way that it's reading through a CSV or things like that using new commands or new packages in Automation 360. But this bot worked fine and it migrated okay. Let's try to migrate one more. We're going to try this supply chain management one. I'm going to delete any of these old folders and files that are there. And supply chain management, we have 2 ATMX files in this case. We've got one that is the master bot and one that is a child bot. One thing I need to do before we go back to running our migration though, I'm going to go to my settings, devices. I need to remove this device as a default device for my creator account. Because again, for me to be able to run migrations using this migration wizard, it has to be a dedicated runner account. That's probably an extra step that you won't have to worry about if you're doing this in a real like enterprise environment. But because I'm doing this all kind of from one machine, it's just an extra thing I had to do. Let's go to Migrate Bots. We'll call this one Supply Chain Migration. Overwrite if it exists. Again, it doesn't exist already, but we'll do that anyway. If I go to My Tasks, Bot Games, Supply Chain, I'll select both of these. Let me see what our Metabots is. Maybe we'll do, yeah. So we will have a Metabot here as well. I'm going to grab this entire supply chain management folder. Okay. So it's going to do everything inside of that folder. It should also detect dependencies for my Metabot. Let's see what's in here. It already detected that, so I don't have anything to put. All right. For my runner, it's going to be this bot runner again. And then this is just kind of a review. And I'll hit Migrate Bots. So it does that check again. And just like we saw last time, it will be sending that task to my dedicated runner account, which again is my same machine. So that's going to run right now. And it's currently performing the migration of the supply chain management bot with all of its corresponding dependencies. So we'll give that a second to go. While we're waiting for that, if you're watching this part of the video, I want to know how your migration has been going so far. as we've continued to improve Automation 360, the migration process has gotten significantly smoother. Right now I'm doing this on the .24 release, and each release that's come out, probably since like .18, has included a lot of significant migration improvements. So let me know how you're doing in your migration. Hopefully this video is helping you with some of the gotchas that you were running into before. All right, I'm going to go to refresh this. And here, let's see the one that just ran. I have an Mbot that was migrated, and it says successful right here. So in bots, Metabots, I have that. And then I also have my bots in the supply chain migration here. So let's take a look at these. There were 3 total components that were migrated. I have an agent lookup ATMX, a master bot ATMX, and a supply chain management Mbot that were migrated. If I go to look at my results, here we don't see any issues. Actually, everything converted successfully. Now, notice that I went from 3 components because I had a Metabot and 2 ATMX files. I now have 5 components. There is the agent lookup ATMX, the masterbot ATMX, which were both converted to Automation 360 compatible bots. But then my Metabot actually got broken up. And my Metabot now has 2 task bots. I have a login bot and a PO lookup bot. And like I talked about in the slides before, those were functions of my Metabot which existed in version 11. Now that I've migrated to Automation 360, that Metabot has been broken up into 2 separate task bots that I can call as child bots from my, I think they get called here from my master bot, but we can go take a look at that. And then it says that it also created a folder for that inside of the My Metabots directory. All right, so let's go look at this master bot here and let's see what's going on. So we didn't have anything that was explicitly marked as an issue or something that we had to check out. But what I want to do is let's go ahead and check these out and run them as our developer user before we let them just run as a bot runner. So what I'm going to do is hit close here. We are now on the supply chain management folder. I will grab this Metabot, or I'm sorry, this masterbot, and go to checkout. And here I'm going to click this advanced options, because what I want to do is check out the bot with all of its dependencies. Because if I need to make changes to these other components, I just want to have them all checked out right now. When I'm doing this for my first migration kind of thing, this is a great way to do it, because I need to have all of this stuff. If I need to make changes, it's a lot easier for me just to have it all locally and make those changes. If I'm working with a bunch of other developers and like this is our umpteenth Automation 360 bot, I probably don't need to check out the dependencies every single time. I probably will know like exactly where I need to make a fix or add some functionality. And the default behavior without checking out the dependencies is that a clone of these dependencies would be migrated locally to my, I shouldn't say migrated, would be copied locally to my private directory so that I could reference them and run that bot that had those dependencies, but I wouldn't be able to make changes to them until I had checked them out. All right, I'll hit checkout. It's going to check out all of those components. If I go to my private repository now, I can see in the supply chain management folder here, I have masterbot and agent lookup. If I go to my Metabots directory, I have my task bots for login and PO lookup. So let's go to my masterbot, because when we opened that up a second ago, I saw something that was concerning to me. We talked about the fact that it's a good practice for us to be checking to see if Google Chrome is using a 64-bit or a 32-bit version of the application. Here it looks like we're hard depending on the 32-bit version. I'm going to check my machine. I'm going to bet that that's not where it is on my machine. So let's go here, Google Chrome application. Chrome EXE is actually in the program files directory for me. So that means I need to update this path. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to do it the lazy way, which is just to delete the x86 and save it. But ideally, you'd want to do that with conditional statements so that if you had some runners that were 32-bit and some that were 64, you were checking for that. It's probably much more of a rare situation you're coming across a 32-bit bot runner, but you may have instances where a 32-bit version of Chrome had been installed and it just never got upgraded to 64-bit. All right, it's looking for a folder which is ctemp supply chain management. Nothing else is really sticking out to me here, but I do want to show something about looping. So there is going to be looping here, and in this case it's a counter-based loop. And the counter is looking to loop 7 total times. Now, during this conversion, it's actually setting a number value that gets incremented by 1 every single time and then converted to a string for my loop counter value 1. If I created this natively in Automation 360 and I was just building a loop, what I can do is actually create my counter variable right here. And I could just call it like counter, because I think that's what we used in version 11. But I could have counter, and then I could have another loop inside of that that references like counter 2. And that way I had those individually defined. If I remember correctly, back to version 11, the loop inside of a loop logic got a little bit complex when everything was relying on counters. So in Automation 360, those are handled with named and defined variables. When it migrated, it didn't do that, but when you create it from net new, you would be able to choose a variable here, and then you would just choose a number variable type, and you could use that as your counter. All right, so we fixed a couple things. One other thing I'm going to do, because this is a practice that I like to encourage others. Our bot right now is still relying on that application path, and I don't totally love that. The way that I do my logging in Automation 360 is to go to %program data %, and this goes to your program data directory. In the Automation Anywhere folder, I usually will create a folder called bots. Inside of that, I'll have my logs. And then here I would have all of the log folders that are needed for my bots. So these are like all of the bots that I've created just as testing, and every time they error off or every time that the bot runs, it will create that local directory. It will establish a pattern for, like, let me find one that looks like a good one. It'll establish a pattern for where it's going to write its logs. It's going to establish a pattern for where it's going to store snapshots. As was written, some of these bots are only logging on the case of error, so that's why they're empty. But this is a path that I like to follow. So what I'm going to do is just copy this value right here, which is that path, and I'm going to modify this bot so that it writes out directly to that directory. So now that is my v-error folder base path. And let's just check this to make sure we're good here. It's going to create snapshots inside of that. It's also going to create logs inside of that. So let's go ahead and run this one. And let me add this as my local machine again and choose run. But regardless of the complexity of the bot that you're migrating, this is the kind of process you'll need to go through, right? Look at the code in version 11, kind of look back and forth to see how it looks in Automation 360, see how certain sections of code were migrated, understand them, possibly simplify them if you want to, or try to rewrite them. Or you can go straight into testing, see how the error handling goes, and just make the changes as needed. So now my subtask just got called, which was my Metabot for login. And now I'm back to my master, and then another subtask got called, which was my PO lookup. And so it's going through and completing this exercise. Again, this is just like a bot that we used for a challenge page for Bot Game Season 1. I will make the bots that I just tested with here, these ATMX files, available to you. So if you want to try and create the exact same experience that I just did on screen, you can do that. But again, there may be ways that I can improve this bot even further now that it's on Automation 360. So one that I see is this is using the Excel Advanced package. I could change that to use the Excel Basic package. And Excel Basic doesn't require actually launching the application every time. It will just connect to the file itself. So that bot is working. Could it be optimized a bit further? For sure, I might want to review that. I could take a look at changing some things around. But right now it's working. I would consider that it's working in a stable fashion. Let me go find where the Excel stuff was happening. Actually, that was in a subtask. So that's in Agent Lookup. If I go here, it is using Excel Advanced, One thing that has changed from version 11 to Automation 360 is there's technically two Excel packages now, Excel Advanced and Excel Basic. Excel Basic will work with XLSX files without the need of actually having Microsoft Excel installed. Now, it does have slightly fewer operations that it can take, but it's able to move very fast in processing XLSX files. Excel Advanced has more operations, but it does require that Excel is installed locally, but it will work with all formats that are supported by Excel. So XLS, XLSX, CSV, other file types like that. So just one thing to think of, right? Like as you're looking at your bot and as you're reviewing that migration, there may be sections of the code where you say like, hey, I want to see what this looks like if we did it a slightly different way. This would be an example of that where I could use the Excel Basic instead and see what the outcome was for my bot. All right, the last thing I want to show you that I promised we would look at is what does it look like if I have a bot that's using the, let's find it here. I wrote one earlier that we could look at. Here we go. What does it look like if I have a bot that's using the migration package? So the migration package, again, just to kind of very quickly cover the interface here of what we see in Automation 360. On the left-hand side, we have all of our operations or all of our packages, similar to what we saw in version 11 and version 10. This is where the commands palette was in Automation 360. These are called packages of actions, right? So this says actions, but let's say for the Excel Advanced, this is the name of the package. These are the actions contained within that package. So likewise, I use the bot migration package and selected the migrate legacy bot action. And the way that this works is you can drag and drop that over onto your bot building workspace here. I have the ability to look at flow view. I have the ability to look at list view, which is much more similar to what we saw in version 10 and version 11. Or I can look at dual view, which kind of shows me both together. Personally, I build in flow view all the time. I know that sounds surprising to many people. I get in fun discussions with developers all the time who tell me that list view is so much better. And believe me, I built in list view because I was using version 10 and version 11 for a long time. I just really like flow view. It helps me to really visually connect with my bot and like see where the separations are, right? So like this is a loop. I see this container here. This is a conditional statement. I see this container here. Everything inside that conditional statement will only run if this condition is true. And in this case, we're checking to see if the file extension is set to mbot or ATMX. So this is just a dummy bot that I built, and I can share this as well. This is one that is going to head to a customer onboarding folder that I have locally. Let's see, where was that? We'll just copy this path and we'll go look at it. Oh wait, we also want to see, we'll also look at that program data directory to make sure that that was showing up. Here's my supply chain management folder. There's the error folder. There's the logs. So that worked as well. I was able to make a modification to a version 11 bot to have it logged to a much more central location. The other thing I should say here is this Automation Anywhere root folder. Obviously, I created the bots directory. Everything else here is the logging that actually happens for the local bot agent. So that's why I put my logs here, because I have like one place to go look for all of the logging and all of the data related to this particular runner or this machine. So I just chose to kind of mimic that same path. All right, back on task, Micah. This is the folder that has my ATMX file for the customer onboarding. Let's just switch it up a little bit. Let's do the employee data migration. I'm going to grab this one. It's the one bot we didn't do yet. I'll set that as the path. So what's going to happen is there is my root path. My loop here says take that root path, which I've defined as S folder path, and iterate through that. And as it iterates through that, what I'm doing is taking the key values of name and extension. I'm saving those to variables, S file name and S extension. And then in my conditional statement, I'm looking to see if S condition contains ATMX or mbot. If it does, then I'm going to run that migration, migrate legacy bot action. And here I have the folder path, which is the full folder path that I defined back here, and then the file name and extension that would enable me to get to that particular file that I want to migrate. If the file exists, I'm going to overwrite it. Now, I'm going to switch tabs one last time because I want to show you one more thing on the private directory. This migration package bot that we're running, right? That's the same one that we have right here. It's located right now in the root of my bots directory. And we talked about earlier, that's not a great practice. That's not a great place to keep things. But when I run this against the, whatever bot we called this one, employee data migration, when I run this, it's going to create those task bots directly in the same folder that this migrate package bot that I just created is actually run from. So if you're going to do it this way instead of the other approach that I just showed, you'll want to make sure that your migration bot, whatever it is either defined or has been copied over to the target subtask directory where you want this thing to exist. So I'm going to run it as is. We'll hit run here. It's going to send that task to my local machine. Very similar to what we saw from the migration that was done by the dedicated migration runner. It's going to perform that migration on all of those files. The only difference here is in this time, the files that it's migrating are all local to my machine, and the target files, which would be the taskbot files that it's creating, will now exist in the Automation 360 control room. The ATMX files will not be copied up there. So just a little bit of a different approach. If you're using, let's say, version 10 and you didn't go through the process of like uploading all of your ATMX files to the control room already, or you didn't upgrade to version 11 first so that you could run the cloud migration utility, this would be the approach you'd probably want to take. Just like, hey, I'm going to take a subset of our bots. I'm going to create or just keep using this same dummy bot over and over to do the migration. If we go back here and look, we can see that a bunch of files were just now created. I'll sort them by when they were created. I've got my master bot, my legacy app task, my master bot template, which was converted over, and my onboarding API. Again, just like we saw for the other ones, I'd be able to go through and start running and modifying my bot. But because I know that there's some subtasks that I'm dependent on, I would want to check every single time a subtask was called. And the easiest way to do that is to use this Control F here, and I could look for the task bot action. Oh, I got to spell it right. Task bot. And I can click through these, and it's going to show me every time that a task bot action has been used. And here I can look at this path and immediately know that this path is not where I just converted everything, right? This path should match wherever I just put that stuff. And I'm going to refresh this so we can see it. It would be right here. So if I click choose here, I could hit browse and then browse within my control room to find where that, I think it was this one, the legacy app task exists. So I need to do that, and then I need to go through and map all my variables. Now, just like we did in version 10 and version 11, there is that quick map capability, so I can do it that way. But you'd need to update all of these if you're not maintaining the same paths. So just one more thing to keep in mind. All right, I know this was a long video, so if you hung with us the whole time, thanks so much for hanging with me. Couple of things on recap. Test as you go, right? Don't just do a gigantic migration of all of your ATMX files and then just like, oh, well, we'll get to testing them eventually. I would break them up. If there's 5 or 10 different developers, I would say, hey, I'm going to take this one, you take this one, he takes that one, she takes that one. And then we go through and like, I'm just going to test that one bot. I'm going to get it fixed. I'm going to test it out. I'm going to see if there's any references that are broken or things that aren't working. And then I'm going to run it. And I'm going to make sure that it's running and do my typical testing to start to make that ready for production. And the way you'd want to do this is you would migrate everything, let's say from your dev environment. I'm going to migrate everything from my dev environment on V10 or V11 to Automation 360. I will then go through the process of converting my bots or migrating my bots like I showed you. I would test all of those, and then I would eventually promote those into my test environment so they could have proper testing on Automation 360, and then promote them to production on Automation 360 as well, right? We don't want to, I'm going to migrate my dev environment to Automation 360, then I'm going to migrate my test environment to Automation 360, and migrate my prod environment to Automation 360, and then do bot migrations on all 3 of those. You don't want to do it that way, right? You want to go through that normal process of going from dev to test to production and only do the migration of the bots once. If you want to migrate the data, historical data from your control room, things like that, you can still do that, but I wouldn't want to migrate all of the files for my test and my production environment, okay? Like I said before, hopefully you're finding this migration content helpful. Please be sure to like and subscribe for more Automation 360 content. It helps us to grow the channel. It helps us to understand where we can create content that's the most useful and most helpful for our user community. Be sure to leave a comment as well. Tell us what you liked about this video. Tell us where we can create some more content that will help you for migrations. We do have more migration-specific content on the way, specifically looking at particular actions and looking at how they work in V11 and V10 versus Automation 360, so that we can kind of have that same-to-same look to understand how things are working. We'll also have some more demos like converting a Metabot that's DLL-based into Automation 360 format and seeing how that works. Okay? So, my name is Micah Smith. Thanks for hanging out. Go be great. We're constantly putting out new Automation Anywhere content. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming tutorials and bot builds. Go be great.